Today on Primetime Local News, I'm joined by Karen Proud, who is the president and CEO of Fertilizer Canada. Today, we're talking about a recent emissions target set out by the federal government, which is looking to reduce overall emissions by 30% across the board. Now, Karen, Fertilizer Canada put out a statement saying that there needs to be more discussion with agricultural producers to see how this will impact the ag industry. What are some of the concerns that Fertilizer Canada has about this target?
First off, is the fertilizer sector 100% behind emissions reductions initiatives. Nobody is impacted more by climate change than farmers. I think you just have to ask the farmers, and they will tell you lots of concern around climate change. So we have been working for over a decade on programs with farmers to try and help reduce emissions and reduce, in particular, nitrous oxide emissions while maintaining productivity. So when the government announces this 30% emissions reduction, what the devil is really in how we're going to achieve it. And so we have been saying to the government, you can't put a cap on the use of fertilizer, which is what they've done or they're proposing in other countries such as Europe, because what that basically does is put a cap on productivity, because we need fertilizer in order to grow crops, in order to get the yields that we need. What we're saying is there are other ways to look at emissions reduction by a better use of fertilizer, and the program that we've set out called sort of 4R nutrient stewardship, along with other best practices such as no-till and cover crops and things like that. All of those best farm practices help to reduce the emissions in a way that doesn't stifle or put a cap on production.
And can you maybe just speak a little bit to what implications does fertilizer have in regard to emissions?
Sure. The emission of concern with regards to fertilizer is nitrous oxide. So it's not one of the emissions that people talk a lot about, but this is where the government and the industry has sort of focused its attention on how we might be able to reduce nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer. And because many fertilizers are nitrogen based, it's putting that nitrogen into the soil to be used and taken up by the microbes. And as part of that whole sort of biological and ecological process, there is the potential for increased nitrous oxide emissions from the use of fertilizer.
And so what does Fertilizer Canada propose in response to this emissions target from the federal government?
So we still think we can talk about emissions reductions. I think there's no question. I think just pulling a number without looking at impacts is a problem. So we need to look at where we could reasonably go in a time frame to reduce the emissions while still meeting productivity goals. Because the government's also said they want Canada to increase its agricultural productivity and export. So you can't have both the way it's being sort of suggested, but I think you still can have both. And so what we're saying is let's adopt and encourage farmers to adopt these suites of best farming practices. So for instance, 4R nutrient stewardship is a suite of best farm management practices that really looks at how fertilizer is being used. And it looks at sort of what source of fertilizer are you using, at what rate. So we are looking at the amount of fertilizer. What time of year are you putting that fertilizer in the ground, and where are you putting it? Are you broadcasting it on top, or are you putting it underneath the soil? Because all those things combined make the most efficient use of fertilizer, so we're not losing as much to emissions and other processes. And what we're saying to the government is let's encourage farmers to adopt these best practices, because the program we've developed around 4Rs, as I said, has been around for over a decade. And it's scientifically proven. We have researchers across the country who have looked at the 4R program and see that it can make a difference. So that's one tool in the toolbox, a really important one. There's others, as I said, there's things like cover cropping and no-till that combined can go a long way to reducing emissions. But let's sit down, industries such as ourselves, farm groups, other groups who are interested, and have a conversation about how we can meet the emissions reduction goals and still have, the agricultural powerhouse that Canada is and should continue to be.
Absolutely. It's always a little bit of a give and take. I hope you guys are able to continue having that conversation. Karen, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Nice to talk to you, to Jillian. If you have any follow-up, feel free to reach back out.